Hey guys, welcome back to the Reformed Youth Guy podcast. I'm your Reformed Youth Guy Christian, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of volunteers. And I've got 3 points in typical Presbyterian fashion. I've got 3 points on volunteers, and within each point I have 3 additional points. So let's get right into it, okay? Okay. First question concerning volunteers is, when do you need them? All right. To answer this question, let me put it to you. It's threefold, okay? You needed them yesterday, you needed them today, and you'll need them tomorrow. You need volunteers in your student ministry now, and there's 3 reasons why I think that are really pertinent as to why you need them now. First and foremost, they bring a level of transparency to your student ministry. And again, no matter what size your student ministry is, if you have a really large student ministry, you definitely need volunteers because you have things for them to do. But let's say you have a small student ministry. Maybe you've got 5, 10 kids. Not a lot, not more than one person or 2 people, maybe a husband and wife team could reasonably handle. But volunteers are not only there to help you handle the responsibility and delegate the jobs of the ins and outs of your youth service or your youth group meeting, but they also bring a level of clarity and transparency to what you're doing with your students to the congregation. Something I think that I have heard this even in my own student ministry is questions from the people in the church, like, what in the world are those teenagers doing in that basement?
What are they doing? Nothing.
What are they doing week in and week out? So volunteers help us to bring that transparency to the church by pulling people from the congregation into what we're doing. It helps build trust within the church. As the youth director, I now have a line of credit, sort of, with my people, because it's not just me down there. It's actually other people from the body. Now, the second point to that is very similar to the transparency. It also brings accountability, because it's not just you down there in the basement. Maybe you have a youth room. If you do, I'm jealous. We're kind of in the basement. That's why I say that. Anyways, but it also brings accountability, not only to maybe your session, but also for yourself. You now also have adults, volunteers, leaders, listening to the lessons that you prepared, participating and help you run the games that you bring to the table, and they are going to be helpful in keeping you accountable. Right? Maybe you're teaching something that's not exactly right theologically. One of your volunteers is somebody who is maybe older, more mature in the faith. They can help keep you accountable in that way. Hopefully that never happens. Hopefully you are doing the due diligence to make sure that your lessons are good and sound. But needless to say, sometimes we say stupid things, and it's good for us to have people to keep us accountable. It also is helpful to have people keep us accountable when it comes to games and things that we maybe should or should not do.
I realize that seems dangerous.
It's good to have those kind of sounding boards that we can kind of run ideas off of and kind of see, do you guys think this will work? Do you think our kids will be interested? Do you think this is appropriate for us to play? All these different things. They help keep us accountable. And thirdly, they also, most importantly, I think, help you to love and minister to every student individually. Now, maybe you have a smaller group, and so this maybe doesn't feel like it applies that much, but it still does. And it especially applies if you have a larger group. It is really, truly impossible to individually love on and minister to every student in your group if it's just you. Especially if you're in a situation where maybe you're bringing in new students. Maybe you're kind of like where we are at Gospel Fellowship, where the Lord is blessing us in this season and we have lots of new people coming to the church and lots of students coming to our student ministry. It's impossible for me to connect with each student on a personal level every week. And so volunteers help us do that. They help us to connect. They help us to minister and love on our students. And not only our students, but their families. And so volunteers help us do those 3 things. So the next question, I think, naturally that comes is, well, who should be a volunteer? I'm glad you asked. There's 3 things I think you should look for in a volunteer. These are the 3 primary criteria that I think you should look for. Number 1, you need to find somebody that loves students. You need to find somebody that's passionate about student ministry. Nobody wants that grumpy old dude that is just basically a warm body in the room. You don't want that guy. You don't want that person who is not passionate about your ministry because if they're not passionate about it, they're not going to give forth the effort that it takes to do it well. We want to do things with excellence. We want to do things well. And the way that we do that is by pulling people in that are passionate about what we're doing. And I think that this also applies to all areas of ministry within the full context of the church. If you have people who are not passionate about people, they probably shouldn't be in a position where they have to love and minister on people. Now, honestly, I think everybody in the body of Christ should be that way, but we do have people who are naturally introverted. Maybe they're not really good at like communicating and reaching out and all that stuff. Well, they're probably not somebody you want to have on like the communication team if you have something like that. So find people that are passionate about student ministry. Secondly, and I think most importantly here, listen, you need somebody that can pass a background check. I'm just saying.
Did you do a background check on these people?
I have heard so many horror stories over the years of friends of mine, friends of friends who have brought people into their student ministry or brought people into their prospective ministry, didn't do a background check, and it did not go very well. Okay. You need a system of background checks. Now, if your church does not have a background check, first of all, I would go to the session, go to your senior pastor, ask if they have one. And secondly, if they say they do not, recommend it strongly that you need one. And if the session says, well, we don't need one, you go ahead, go out of your way and have one for your student ministry. I don't see a session saying no, but do it. Even if there's some cost to it, it's worth it. There are times where I would pay out of my own pocket to cover the cost of any background checks. Again, they're not very expensive, but it's necessary. You need to make sure that the people that you're putting in charge or putting over your students is somebody that has a clear background, that there are no issues that you can foresee already. Okay, so you want to check that off. That's a big one. That's a red flag. And let me also make this recommendation to you. Do your state background check. Most of the time, those are free for volunteers. But then have them do a federal check. And some people say, well, that's overkill. It's really not. I can think of one story where a federal background check would have saved a particular church a lot of heartache and pain that I know personally, if they would have just gone out of the way, spent the 15 or 20 bucks, whatever it was at the time, and do the federal check. I won't tell you the gory details of that story, but trust me, it was not good. You need somebody who can pass a background check. Thirdly, you need to find people who are gifted in ways that you're not. Now, as youth pastors, youth directors, we tend to be pretty gifted in lots of different things for the most part. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that oftentimes the youth pastor gets like tasked to do like almost a little bit of everything. Like, hey, that room needs painted, give it to the youth. Hey, that toilet's clogged, give it to the youth pastor. So a lot of times we become carpenters, we become painters, electricians, all these things. That's great. Like, God bless you for being so talented. You are a very, very gifted individual, but there are definitely things that you're not very gifted at. And I hope that you recognize that and look for those things and giftings in other people and try to pull that into your student ministry. You can't be all things all the time. So you need people that can complement your gift settings with their gift settings. This is the body of Christ. Some of us are hands and some of us are feet. So we need all of it. So try to find people that complement the gifts that you have with gifts that you do not. And then thirdly, this is the third main point here. How do you recruit volunteers? I think we realize I need volunteers now, and I know what I kind of need to look for in a volunteer, but where in the world do I find them? And this can be one of the most difficult aspects of volunteerism within your church. And a lot of it is due to culture. A lot of times you have to develop a culture of volunteerism. But here are 3 ways in which you can recruit. And I'm going to list these from, worst to best ways to get volunteers. The first way that you can try to get a volunteer, and this is the worst way I think you can do it, but it's still an option. It's something that I employ when I have no other options, is the cattle call.
Hey, down. Hey, cattle.
Now, the cattle call is, if you're not familiar with that term, I grew up in the South, so I was very familiar with this term, but when I shared it with our Christian Education Committee and our Youth Committee, they all kind of laughed because they didn't know what I was talking about. But a cattle call is when you get up on a Sunday morning and make an announcement or put a blurb in the bulletin looking for volunteers. It's basically just an open call for people to come to you, hopefully, and, say that they're interested in volunteering in student ministry. Now, one of the reasons I don't recommend this is not everybody that wants to do student ministry should do it. And a lot of times too, sometimes people just don't, respond to the cattle call. Like you don't oftentimes get a great response of people, like especially high caliber, high quality people coming and being like, you know what, I've been feeling this gifting and I just didn't realize you needed it. I'm here. Like that oftentimes doesn't happen. Oftentimes, if you do get people, a lot of times they're the people that you're going to have to eventually say no to. So if you're a person that if you're not very good at saying no, that cattle call may not be for you, but it can be an effective way in which you can recruit. Again, these are going to be listed from worst to best. The second, and I do recommend this is a high recommend, ask for recommendations from the church leadership. Ask from your senior pastor. If you have a youth committee, ask them, hey, who in our church do you think would fit with our student ministry as a volunteer? As pastors and leaders, part of our job description, whether it's written or not, is to actually, this is biblically, our job description is to see the gifts in other people and help to develop those gifts. And so, especially if you're new, you're coming into a church, you don't know anybody, lean on the knowledge and wisdom of your senior pastor, associate pastor, your session, your youth committee, the people who are part of the congregation that know the people. They can possibly give you a good recommendation of who should be and even who should not be a volunteer in your student ministry. And then third and finally, if you're going to go find volunteers, this is going to be the best way to do it, hands down every time, is that personal invitation. If you've gotten recommendations from your senior pastor or your committee, or you've noticed some giftings in somebody yourself, go to that person individually and shake their hand and say, hey friend, are you interested in student ministry? I'd like to have a conversation. You can do it over coffee, take them out to dinner, whatever. But face-to-face invitation, more people respond to a face-to-face invitation than anything else. And the reason I highly recommend this is I think the best way to recruit volunteers is, again, you're sort of already doing some of that vetting out yourself, right? They may already have a background check, right? The first thing you need to do is ask if you have an office administration or whoever keeps your background checks, if you have them, ask them for a running list of people who have clearances. There you go. There's a list of people who are qualified as far as having a background check that can volunteer in your student ministry, right? Another reason is it also allows you to kind of vet out, who has the giftings that you need, right? You're not necessarily kind of getting the grab bag from the cattle call where you're not really sure what you're going to get, like the mystery box. You're actually getting people that you see giftings in, or you've had recommendations that might be a good fit. And, and it may not work out. That's fine. But going to them and asking them, shaking their hand, taking them out to coffee and saying, hey, would you like to be involved in the student ministry? How could you be involved with the student ministry? That's the best way in which you can get quality volunteers every time. And again, they may not all stick. They may try and say, I just don't think this is my thing. That's part of the whole thing about finding people who are passionate, but that's going to be the best way. Personal invitation. So again, let's just review, okay? Number one, when do you need them? You need them now. You need them yesterday, you need them today, you definitely need them tomorrow. Who should be a volunteer, right? Remember, somebody that loves students, somebody that can pass a background check, and then also somebody who is gifted in ways that maybe you're not. And then finally, how do you recruit them? You can do the cattle call. You can ask for recommendations, and I think most importantly, most effective, you can give them a personal invitation. So these are three main points when it comes to volunteering within your student ministry. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Let me ask you, do you currently have volunteers in your student ministry? How do you manage those volunteers? There's so many things that we could talk about concerning the topic of volunteerism within student ministry, but I hope that maybe these points are helpful to you if you don't have volunteers or you're in the process of trying to find volunteers, because we need them. Volunteers are a vital part of any ministry, and especially student ministry. So hopefully these are helpful to you. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a 5-star review. Let us know how we're doing. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this episode of the Reformed Youth Guy. Again, I'm your Reformed Youth Guy, Christian, and we'll see you guys next time here on the Reformed Youth Guy podcast. We'll see you later.